Well, welcome to the 700 Club. Accusations, death threats, and opposition. Well, that's what met a bishop and his wife from the Church of God in Christ who were sent to Israel.
Their goal to build a bridge between African Americans and the Jewish state. So what went wrong? Chris Mitchell reports from Jerusalem.
The Church of God in Christ sent the Plumbers off to Israel with prayer and the laying on of hands at their annual convention in front of thousands at the St. Louis Convention Center in late 2019. Then they set their sights for Israel. CBN News sat down with the Plumbers here.
We came to build a bridge not just for Kojic, but for also Black America. We have found that it's vitally important that African Americans have a relationship with Israel. And so building a bridge is what our primary purpose and call is.
I think that it's important, is vital that they understand Israel, the culture, the country, the people, the land of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of Israel. It's important for them to understand that. And I lend my voice to do that, and I'm committed to doing that.
Bishop Plummer once led the National Religious Broadcasters Organization, and the Israel Allies Foundation recently recognized Plummer as one of Israel's top 50 Christian allies. But soon after the Plumbers arrived in Israel, they became the brunt of a number of accusations, misleading headlines, and doctored videos.
And they twisted it to say they're coming here to convert Jews, they're coming here to baptize Jews, they're coming here to proselytize Jews. There's a word that they use called missionize. I hadn't quite heard that word before, but there's been these accusations.
It was hurtful. And as I say to my husband, it's because I know that he has been an advocate, very involved in Jewish-Black relationships, and making sure that cohesiveness is there.
And these are a number of somewhat well-known rabbis in the Orthodox community that are calling for our ouster. They're wanting us to leave the country. They've created videos and they've distributed to the department heads of the ministries in Israel to say that these people mean us terrible. And they say these people, they're talking about the Church of God in Christ. They're talking about, the Plumbers, and they need to be gone.
But it got worse.
And to be clear, we've been threatened with death.
Yes.
So we've received written death threats saying we will kill you.
Yes.
We've received threats saying if we find you and catch you out in public, we'll do this, that, and the other.
Yes.
So this is not just some fantasy that we're on here.
Yet some Israelis reached out to the Plumbers, like Jonathan Feldstein of the Genesis 123 Foundation, who fosters Jewish-Christian relations, and invited Plummer to speak on a Facebook Live.
It was an amazing hour-and-a-half conversation that was wide-ranging, and I really wanted to take it in a direction that we would be redeeming. He's been subject to so much criticism and really hasn't had a great opportunity to present why he's here, the positives of it. And I understand a great deal of the significance of his being here, but I wanted to hear it from him. They've been the subject of a great deal of hostility, some of it with, I believe, misunderstanding, and some of it probably with some ill intention.
Despite the accusations, death threats, and opposition, the Plumbers plan to stay, fulfill their calling, and believe love will prevail.
So we're here. There's nothing anyone can do to stop us from loving Israel and loving the people of Israel. We love this place.
CBN News contacted the Israeli government for a statement about the situation, but did not receive one before the time of broadcast. The Plumbers have also been in touch with the police. Given the nature of the threats and intimidation, Plummer expects the government to speak up.
And I think that the government of Israel has to make a statement. Silence is not acceptable. Christians should have the freedom to express their worship. And because we're Black Americans and because we represent a very significant organization, I have decided as the Bishop of Israel that I'm going to address it. I'm going to address it at the highest level I can, because Christians need to be free to express themselves without harassment, without bigotry, without prejudice.
And they want the freedom to make their contribution to the state of Israel.
We happen to represent a significant number of people in the United States that we feel are at a place in history that needs to engage Israel on a very high and deep level.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Well, this is an unfortunate fact of life in Israel today. There seems to be some kind of backlash against evangelicals. I remember being at an E21 conference in Jerusalem, and there were actually people appointed wondering, you know, we need to watch the conference and see if anybody leaves the conference in order, you know, to make sure they don't go evangelize Jews. It's a horrific thing, and this is something that, in particular, the Orthodox community in Jerusalem should get a handle on. Here is someone, Bishop Plummer is a former chairman of the National Religious Broadcasters, the NRB. He's been an incredible figure in Christian television. For him to leave all of that, to say, I want to go to Jerusalem, I want to move my family, I want to live in Israel so I can create a bridge between the African American community and Israel. What an incredible thing for him to do. What an incredible sacrifice for him. And to then get death threats and misrepresentations and videos twisted to mean something completely different. This should never be. Realize that within the Tanakh, within the Bible, within the prophets, you have express prophecies that there will come a day when Gentiles come to Zion. They reach out with their hands and say, please teach us the Torah. Please accept that. When Christians are coming, they're coming to the birthplace of Christianity. I like to remind both Christians and Jews, Christianity is a Jewish religion. The New Testament is entirely written by Jewish people. This is something that was birthed in Israel, and for Christians to want to go back there and go live there is completely natural. Now, we did reach out to the government of Israel, and they have responded. Here, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs says, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs condemns any kind of hate speech and death threats, and if these messages were sent to the bishop and his wife, we regret it very much. I think we need to give proof back to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They actually were done. If that were done in America, that's a very tangible threat. That's a felony crime to deliver to someone a death threat. So there needs to be follow-up on this. But this is something that is absolutely crucial. You look at this, the Israeli government should absolutely get involved to make sure the plumbers are safe. Well, in other news, most Americans are taking the COVID safety warning seriously this Thanksgiving. So what are they doing to protect themselves and their families? John Jessup has more on that story from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. John?
Thanks, Gordon. 61% of Americans say they've changed their holiday plans because of coronavirus. That's according to a new Axios Ipsos poll. Of that 61%, 29% say they'll only be celebrating with their immediate household members. 24% say they'll have a smaller dinner than previously planned, and just above 10% say they're not traveling at all. Fewer travelers means less people flying. Still, millions are hopping on planes ahead of Thursday, raising concern among health officials.
What we're doing now is going to be reflected 2-3 weeks from now.
I'm begging you, hold on just a little bit longer. Keep Thanksgiving and the celebration small and smart this year.
Those warnings come as COVID cases surge across America with a record of more than 88,000 current hospitalizations. Well, Michigan's Democratic Attorney General is investigating threats against Republican election officials. Monica Plummer and William Hartman initially voted against certifying results in Wayne County last week. 2 hours later, they changed their votes after intense pressure, including accusations of racism and online threats. On CBN's Newswatch program, Plummer explained why she initially voted against certification.
I saw that the number of absentee ballots listed in the poll book as received did not match the total of ballots that were counted on election night in a majority of the absentee precinct or counting boards. There were several absentee counting boards that we were not able to get those answers to completely reconcile.
In the aftermath, Plummer said she received threats on email and social media, as well as graphic text messages threatening her daughter. Plummer and Hartman later unsuccessfully filed affidavits attempting to rescind their votes to certify. Well, a historic day on the stock market Tuesday, the Dow closing above 30,000 for the first time ever. As CBN's Heather Sells reports, that burst of investor confidence is a sign of hope as many Americans are struggling in the COVID-crippled economy.
Across the country, the economy is hitting Americans hard, with 21 million out of work and 6.6% of mortgages in delinquency.
The congressional bailout that has been protecting mortgages and extending unemployment runs out at the end of December, and that puts pressure on Congress to pass another relief package.
But investors are looking down the road and signaling their optimism. On Tuesday, the Dow rose more than 400 points to trade over 30,000 for the first time ever.
What completely is a surprise is the fact that we've had this massive pandemic that's thrown tens of millions of Americans out of work, that saw a 34% decline in the market from mid-February to late March. And despite all that, the market has rebounded.
But perhaps even better, the S&P 500 index rose more than 1.5% Tuesday for its own record high. It has a far greater impact on 401k accounts than the Dow. One factor credited with the rise, news that several vaccines in development are showing strong results and could start distribution in mid-December.
Even though the headlines are very bad right now with regard to the coronavirus, and there's concern about what that means for the economy over the next several months, investors are looking beyond that. They're looking to the likelihood of vaccines becoming widely available in 2021 and how that might potentially bring about a return to normalcy.
President Trump, who has shunned the media in recent weeks, returned to the podium to celebrate and credit the medical progress.
We've never broken 30,000, and that's just despite everything that's taken place with the pandemic. I'm very thrilled with what's happened on the vaccine front.
Many also believe investors are encouraged to see the presidential transition process moving forward, and in particular, Joe Biden selecting the former Fed chair, Janet Yellen, as Secretary of the Treasury. The good news from Wall Street cannot trickle down fast enough for the many Americans who find themselves in lawn food lines, like this distribution sponsored by CBN's Operation Blessing, the Goodness Project, and Gateway Church in Fort Worth, Texas last weekend.
Our community has been struggling during this time, losing jobs, having people laid off.
These families are looking to get back on their feet, and with good news from Wall Street and potentially Congress, the outlook becomes a little brighter. Heather Sells, CBN News.
An encouraging note to end on there. Gordon, still a lot of COVID relief funding dries up in December, so still a lot of uncertainty in the future.
Well, there's a tremendous uncertainty. I mean, you look at, on one level, I'm happy for 401ks. On another level, though, people are still hurting in America. And you look at the number of unemployed, you look at the number of people in absolute need. As stimulus starts to run out, what does that mean for evictions? What does that mean for foreclosures? Those things are still with us, and the pandemic is still with us. And regardless of all the hope about the vaccine, we're not going to have anywhere close to the number of doses that are needed for our country until April or May or June. And you start looking at, that's a long time from now if you don't have enough money to put food on the table. So that's why Operation Blessing is really ramping up our food relief right here in America. It's been over 37 million pounds of food delivered, over 4,000 distribution centers, We want to help people in the early onset of this. We saw a 100% increase in demand for food in America, which was just a staggering percentage. And we wanted to respond. So we're there for people. And if you're a member of the 700 Club, we're there in your name. Now, I want to tell you about something that the Robertson family has done for decades. I learned this from my father way back in the 1960s. He would take whatever amount of money that they would spend, my mother and father would spend on Thanksgiving dinner, on Christmas dinners, and they would take an equal amount and give it so that the poor could eat and the poor could have enough food for the holidays. And so we've continued that tradition. I invite you to join with us in this. It's a wonderful way to give thanks and to say, we remember and we want to help the poor in our land. If you want to be a part of that and give an amount equal to your Thanksgiving dinner, all you have to do is call us, 1-800-700-7000, and say, I want to give to Operation Blessing. There's also a place on the website on cbn.com where you can designate your gift to hunger relief, or you can write to us, CBN Center, Virginia Beach, Virginia, 23463. As we give thanks to the close of a very tumultuous 2020, let's also remember the poor in our midst, and let's make sure that they have food for this Thanksgiving, this Christmas.